And Wednesday night, the 49ers have made a significant move, one that people had been talking about for a while. But Shanahan has sent defensive coordinator Steve Wilks from the booth down to the field for at least this game against Jacksonville. We know the truth of the matter right now is that the 49ers defense is coming out of this bye with two major blemishes on its mark in consecutive weeks, horrific games against Minnesota and then Cincinnati. And we know that Steve Wilks is a new defensive coordinator for this team, experienced elsewhere, but new for this team. And I'm going to delve back into some of the stuff that I've talked about over the past couple of weeks. It was always going to be an interesting challenge to unify what Steve Wilks was bringing to the table with what the 49ers were already doing well. But the stark reality is that this was the number one defense before Steve Wilks arrived, and it's now mired down at number 15 in DVOA. It's been a number 30 defense over its past two games. So Kyle Shanahan felt enough need after the bye week audit. He had some extra time to self-scout. He felt the need and the urgency to shake some things up. And I think that's at the bottom of this move for Steve Wilks from the booth down to the field. Now, there's several interesting dynamics here, and I'm going to point some of them out. Those of you who have ever actually been to a professional football game and had the chance to stand on the field, you will know that you can't see stuff as well from the field. I mean, the field's just too big. It's over 53 yards wide. It's obviously 120 yards long, including the end zones. And without a bird's eye view, it's really, really hard to call plays. You rely on your eyes in the sky. So just naturally, Steve Wilks moving down from the booth to the field means that I think he's going to be more reliant on other guys that stay upstairs in the booth. So I'm not saying that they're taking play calling duties away from Steve Wilks, but I am suggesting that logic tells us that he's going to be reliant on guys in his old spot a little bit more than he was before. So to me, what I see when I read between the lines of this move is a simplification. And that's what everybody's been talking about, starting with Richard Sherman on his podcast. The former 49ers defensive captain said that the 49ers need to simplify, go back to the basics. They're running too much man on first and second downs. Steve Wilks brought his philosophy, has been trying to integrate it with the 49ers philosophy, but a lot's gone wrong over their past two games. And because of that, I think that Kyle Shanahan on the audit of his defense over the course of this bye week came to the same conclusion that Richard Sherman came to, and that was, whoa, let's back up. Let's go back to what made us the number one defense last season. 49ers were number one last season, and they've dropped to number 15 with healthy and arguably better personnel. I say arguably because they've been missing that second edge setter opposite Bosa up until now. Now they have Chase Young. We'll see how he does in that role. That could really help the 49ers. But one of the critical drop-offs has been in run defense, perhaps the critical drop-off from number 2 down to number 26 in EPA per play. And there's no Sansom Ebukam this year, who was really good at setting that edge on base downs. Jordan Willis is gone. Obviously, Charles Omenihu is gone. So some of the personnel has left, but they have picked up Javon Hargrave. They should be a year more mature in the secondary. They should be a year more mature at that linebacker position. So, a lot of these things should theoretically balance out. The 49ers definitely shouldn't be seeing a drop-off from number 1 to number 15. And I think that's why Kyle Shanahan felt compelled to make a move, because it wasn't just bad for the defense against Minnesota and Cincinnati. It was horrific. I mean, this defense played as the number 30 defense in the NFL. It wasn't just a slip to number 15. This is full-fledged ugly defense for the 49ers. Joe Burrow completed 19 straight passes. That shouldn't happen at the NFL level. So Shanahan made the move that he felt that he had to make. Now, I will say these are just my observations of being at practice. Steve Wilks, to me, and again, this is small sample size stuff because this is all fresh, but this week as I've been watching practice, he's been hanging around the defensive linemen more than he had been in the past. And this is just based on Monday's practice and Wednesday's practice, and it could be that Wilks is just checking out how Chase Young is looking because those have been his first two sessions with the team since the trade. But I've noticed Wilks, especially on Monday, a little more rah-rah, clapping near the defensive linemen. In the past, I'd noticed him more with the defensive backs. And that was the big deal, right, for Steve Wilks was he came in as a guy that would focus on the secondary. For that reason, he wanted to be upstairs in the booth during games because you could see the coverages and the machinations of the secondary better from a bird's eye view. And Chris Kacerek, the defensive line coach, would remain in charge of everything up front. I do think that in general, the 49ers have had trouble marrying the coverage and the rush together. Pass rush has to help coverage, coverage has to help rush. The data tells us that it's been more the fault of the coverage than the pass rush because the pressure numbers have still been good. We watch on tape. I get it was ironic that the big mess up early in the Bengals game came from the defensive line when Eric Armstead and Nick Bosa couldn't take down Joe Burrow. But outside of that, I do think that the coverage combinations have not been good enough. So anyway, Wilks had been working with, and really hands-on fashion in practice, had been working with the defensive backs from what I could tell over the course of training camp and the first several weeks of the season. During the open viewing period of practice on Monday and on Wednesday, I noticed him standing over by the defensive linemen. He was clapping a bit with the defensive linemen, offering some rah-rah help over there, some encouragement. But, now within the context of this move, which is Shanahan moving Steve Wilks from the booth to the field, I do wonder if those two are related because now Steve Wilks is going to be dealing with the 49ers players eye to eye on the field. Shanahan said that this is a communication thing. The way that this works with the 49ers as far as calling the play is Steve Wilks radios down to Johnny Holland, who's the linebackers coach on the sideline. Johnny Holland then radios into Fred Warner, who's the 49ers' one defensive player with a radio in his helmet. So it's a little game of telephone. It's unclear if the 49ers will continue operating it that way now that Steve Wilks will be down on the field. But Kyle Shanahan said that he wanted Wilks to be able to communicate back and forth with linebackers on the sideline, and the linebackers are the ones that broadcast the message to the whole defense. That's namely Warner. He wanted him on the sideline to be able to make adjustments and do whatever he needs to from an alignment perspective. We can only hypothesize at this point about some of these things, and we could connect dots, but we can't be fully sure of anything. And you know me, I don't like to jump the gun. I don't like to be, making definitive statements about stuff that we don't have the full answers to. But I can tell you that I watched the tape, and I watched the tape a lot, and the 49ers have been out of position consistently on the second level. That's happened at critical junctures over the course of the past two games. I can tell you that Fred Warner has said that he's been out of position the second level. And then I can also tell you that Steve Wilks is going to be moving down from the booth to the field because Kyle Shanahan wants him to, and the 49ers cited communication issues. Shanahan wants better communication between Wilks and specifically the linebackers, and he's going to get that face-to-face. When you put those three things together, you can infer that the 49ers have had some communication breakdowns that have led to missed alignments on the back end, which have hurt the coverage, and that, of course, has hurt the pass rush because quarterbacks are going quick release, because the 49ers coverage hasn't held up long enough for the pass rush to hit home. So the 49ers hope that they can iron out some of these communication issues. And I think that we take it a step further and we say, oh, maybe they're going to be doing some stuff differently schematically. Maybe they're going to go back to, what Richard Sherman was saying, a little bit more zone, because they are moving the guy who has changed some of this stuff, Steve Wilks, away from the bird's eye spot where he would be better able to scheme things up down onto the field. That naturally means a reliance on the eyes in the sky upstairs who are going to remain there. And remember, when the 49ers hired Steve Wilks, one of the terms of hiring him was that he couldn't bring his own staff. Kyle Shanahan wanted Steve Wilks to work with the 49ers' existing staff because he didn't want to change too much. Wilks, respected defensive mind, had done things a little bit differently. Shanahan thought that intensifying the coverage combinations in the back end could be like sprinkling a little extra into the 49ers defense. It's always tricky, though, because you had the number one defense in the league already, right? Shanahan thought he could take that number one defense in the league and morph it to another level. And people who say, well, that was foolish. Well, Kyle saw his dad, Mike, be part of that exact dynamic. In 1992, the 49ers hired Mike Shanahan to be the offensive coordinator. In 1992, the 49ers had already won 4 Super Bowls. They were highly successful offensively. They brought in Mike Shanahan to be the OC, even though he did things differently, just like Steve Wilks does things differently. What happened then is that George Seifert, who obviously followed Bill Walsh as the 49ers head coach, George Seifert had Mike Shanahan come out early, left his family behind over the course of the offseason, locked him in a room and said, study what we've done so that way you're an expert on what we've done, so you're fluent in this language, and then you can sprinkle in what you're doing. And Kyle Shanahan followed that same exact blueprint with Steve Wilks. Obviously, at some point during this process, the 49ers have hit at least hiccups. And now they hope that this move of Steve Wilks from the booth to the field is what can overcome those hiccups. And I think on some level, it just is a simplifying move because Steve Wilks is going to be in a spot where it's harder to scheme stuff up. He's said so before. He's called plays before from the sideline in Cleveland. He was on the sideline last year with the Carolina Panthers, did a great job as the interim coach. But the truth of the matter is that if you've ever been near a football field, the bird's eye view is better for the X's and O's. Shanahan himself said that, but he's the head coach, so he's got to be down on the field. 49ers just want better communication because that's obviously been an issue. We've seen the back end struggle. And, I mean, there are 2 former defensive coordinators before this. Robert Saul and DeMeco Ryans were both on the field. They were the rah-rah types. So the 49ers might want a little bit of boost from that regard. They want the better communication. And I think that this is potentially a signal that the 49ers are heeding Richard Sherman's advice and going back to some of the basics, a little bit more zone coverage on first and second down, especially now that they have Chase Young. Because you've got a potentially overpowering pass rush with Bosa, Chase Young, Javon Hargrave, Eric Armstead, Randy Gregory. I mean, this is a dominant pass rush in terms of the talent that they've assembled. So you can't take too many risks on the back end. You have to go with what's proven because the back end just needs to force opposing quarterbacks to hitch. That extra hitch, that's all that the 49ers need. An extra hitch, and that pass rush is going to get home. This week is going to be fascinating against Jacksonville because Jacksonville is a team that gets the ball out quickly. Trevor Lawrence is averaging 2.4 seconds from snap to release, which is the second fastest time in the NFL. They also have a really bad pass protecting offensive line, number 31 in pass block win rate. So, and they also have an assortment of weapons that I think the 49ers should be able to cover with their personnel. We talk about some of the issues on the back end. I think a lot of them originate from the slot cornerback position. Remember the first piece of drama about this 49ers defense, aside from the Nick Bosa holdout, was Isaiah Oliver in the offseason. And Steve Wilks wasn't playing Isaiah Oliver on all the nickel snaps in training camp. Instead, he was sliding Deommodore Lenoir in. It was like, oh boy, 49ers signed Isaiah Oliver. They're not playing him anymore. And Steve Wilks' explanation was, I want to use Isaiah for certain matchups. He's a bigger nickel back. I want to use him for tight ends, splitting out wide. But he didn't want to use him against the shiftier receivers. He wanted to bring Ambry Thomas into the game, slide Lenoir in. But for whatever reason, and Ambry Thomas has really struggled, so that's probably the reason, the 49ers have abandoned that plan, and Isaiah Oliver at 6'1", taller than your standard nickel with less change of direction than your standard nickel, has been playing that nickel back position. Well, so that's one of the fracture points that I think has really been hurting the 49ers defensively, and it's been hard for Steve Wilks to scheme around that. But this game against Jacksonville offers, I think, a perfect opportunity for the 49ers to correct course because the leading receiver for Jacksonville is Evan Ingram, who's a tight end, who's 6'3". He can move, but he can't move like Christian Kirk. So the reason you have this big slot in Isaiah Oliver is to cover guys, and Steve Wilks has expressly said this before, it's to cover bigger guys who line up out wide. And I'll tell you what, Evan Ingram lines up out wide and in the slot way more often than he lines up as an inline tight end. So if there were ever an opportunity for the 49ers to plug in the pieces that they have matchup-wise against an opposing offense that's at least decent, and Jacksonville's at least decent, they're number 13 DVOA, it's this week. Well, I think Oliver on Engram, Diomede Lenore, in whenever they run that trips formation, whenever the Jacksonville puts all three of those guys out there in a bunch, Diomede Lenore inside on Christian Kirk, who's obviously one of the better, shiftier slot receivers in the game, and Charvarius Ward on Calvin Ridley, who's the X receiver for this Jacksonville team. I think that's the way you have to play it. I think you keep it simple with the coverage combination. I think that is simple. I think that plays right along to the 49ers' strengths. Whatever you do, man zone, that's something that Richard Sherman is talking about on first and second downs. But whatever you do, that coverage needs to be simple and effective enough for the 49ers pass rush to feast against an offensive line that they should overmatch. And then you have to trust your linebackers, Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw, because that's, Travis Etienne is a really, really damn good weapon, an explosive weapon out of the backfield for Trevor Lawrence. Former college teammates over there at Clemson, right? Etienne can line up wide. He scored a touchdown not too long ago, lined up wide. He'll put strain on you in that way. That's where the 49ers and why they have those fast linebackers. So from a personnel standpoint, I'm really, really intrigued by what's going to happen this weekend because the big adjustment is happening. 49ers aren't talking too much about their process. I just think that this is naturally a simplification move. And I also wonder which other 49ers defensive staffer can even call plays. Corey Undlin, who had some defensive coordinator play calling experience, he's no longer in the building, former cornerback coach. He's over in Houston with D'Amico Ryans, who had play calling experience. Robert Saleh's in New York. Maybe Daniel Bullocks, the secondary coach, can help scheme some stuff up. I know it's a big staff, but Wilks was a senior member and is the senior member, right? And he's going to be down on the field now, but he's going to have to be relying on some eyes up in the sky. So this is a collective effort. It's not just Steve Wilks. It's the entire defense. Kyle Shanahan on his audit, I wouldn't be surprised if he sat in on some of the defensive planning here over the past few days. He definitely examined what the defense had been doing. He definitely came to the conclusion that Steve Wilks is going to need to be down on the field. So the 49ers have made a big change. And now, we can make grand proclamations right now, but they don't mean anything. All we could fairly say at this point is that we need to see how this pans out for the 49ers on Sunday. I'm giving you all the facts, all the dynamics that might potentially be affected, but until we see this team play, then it's anybody's guess. And so far, the context of that is 2 weeks ago, Shanahan openly criticized Steve Wilks for the cover zero all-out blitz against Minnesota at the end of the first half. He said that it wasn't the right time to call that. Shanahan then blamed himself, saying he should have called timeout to scuttle the play before it happened. But that's water under the bridge. Then following that, just a few days following that, the 49ers got torched by Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. And Kyle Shanahan, again, publicly, and it would be hard to hide this. Shanahan moved Steve Wilks from the booth down to the field, and we're going to see that in Jacksonville for the first time. A simplification move, in my opinion. Anyway, why don't we talk about this? 49ers Q&A on this episode of 49ers Intel. I'm going to talk about Brock Purdy against this Jacksonville defense in a little bit, maybe on a different video. I'm not sure yet about that. That's going to be very interesting against a bend but don't break defense because it's going to test Brock Purdy's patience. It's going to test the 49ers' fundamental soundness. Cleveland and Jacksonville, the two best defenses the 49ers will have faced this year, with Baltimore looming in about a month and a half on Christmas Day. Let's get those questions in. Mr. Reason, why is it a simplification move? My theory is, and this is just a theory. See, I'm not going to sit up here spouting stuff as fact that I don't know as fact, but I know how dynamics work as far as sightlines go. And if you're down on the field, you're not seeing as much as if you're up in the booth. Steve Wilks has expressly said that he likes being up in the booth so he can see the coverages working together, so he can make those adjustments. It's chaotic down on the field. You don't have the line of sight down on the field that you would have up in the booth. So I think naturally, this is just my theory again, this means that Steve Wilks is going to have to be more reliant on the eyes up in the sky in the booth. And guess what? He didn't bring any of his staff over from previous stops. Kyle Shanahan said, you got to work with this staff because we've had a lot of success defensively here. Steve Wilks inherited the number one defense in the NFL. So if Steve Wilks is going to be relying more on eyes up in the sky of the 49ers' existing defensive staff, to me, that's a simplification move. To me, that's a sign that the 49ers might be heeding Richard Sherman's advice, going back to some of the stuff that was working in the past. If you think that logically off in that chain of reaction, you could comment. That's just me using logic to try to deduce what the 49ers might be doing here. Michael Powers asked, have they tried Ambry Thomas at the slot? A lot of shiftier wide receivers are not very physical. But the problem is they would just run at the slot all day. So even if those shiftier wide receivers aren't as physical, if you bring a less physical DB into the nickelback position, offenses will just audible out and run at him. The nickel cornerback position is very, very underappreciated because you're near the fray of the line of scrimmage. Bodies flying everywhere. Linemen are closer so they can reach block you. So you've got to be able to bounce off blocks physically. And the 49ers haven't seen that type of physicality from Ambry Thomas to say, hey, he could be in on the slot in this mess. So it's really, really tough to play inside. There's a reason why they like Isaiah Oliver's size in there, because they do think that he can do better in that traffic with his size and strength than somebody like Ambry Thomas could do. But then they lose out on the route running coverage, right? The ability to cover some of those shiftier guys. That's why they really like Deommodore Lenoir on the inside. But when you move him inside, the hyena inside, because he has that good strength, quickness combination, somebody's got to take the outside. That's why Ambry Thomas took the outside, but they weren't happy with that. So then they just said, okay, wait, we can't give up that much on the outside. Let's put Deommodore Lenoir back outside and leave Isaiah Oliver on the inside. I think that finally they have a matchup this week where it makes sense to have Isaiah Oliver on Evan Ingram, because that's the type of body that he needs to follow. That's the type of body that he can follow, and have Deommodore Lenoir work against Christian Kirk. I don't have any access to the 49ers game plan. That's how I would play it. I think that's logical, and I think that trails and tracks with everything that we've learned about Steve Wilks and this defensive plan before. Any update on Trent Williams or Banks? I don't think we're going to see Banks this week. He's got the turf toe. They've expected him to be out for a few weeks, so I wouldn't expect any Aaron Banks. Trent Williams, highly questionable, I would say at this point. Kyle Shanahan said this about Trent Williams. It's not a high ankle sprain, but it's more than a low ankle sprain. So it's somewhere in between. By that, he means that Williams has had a lot of ankle sprains in his career. He's 35 years old now. And it seems that the damage accrued over those ankle sprains in the past have now come back around. And when Williams got hurt and played through it against Cleveland, they've created some complications that have slowed the recovery time. November 15th, a week from now, will mark 1 month since the injury. So a little bit over 4 weeks. High ankle sprains take 4 to 6 weeks on average. So Williams, if he misses this game against Jacksonville, will be out for in the window of the high ankle sprain duration, even though they say it's not a high ankle sprain. We'll find out more tomorrow. He didn't practice today. We'll find out more on Thursday. If Trent Williams doesn't practice, I would say that his potential availability for Sunday is doubtful. And low and high ankle sprain, by the way, that's not like the degree of ankle sprain. It's the spot of the sprain. Low ankle means down near your foot. High ankle means, more of your leg. And the high ankle sprains are really tough and really painful. So somebody asked if it's a medium ankle sprain, like half, like it's a degree. It's not a degree of low, medium, high. It's a spot. And I think that the high ankle is not the injured part of Trent Williams' ankle right now, but the low ankle has it's more than just your standard low ankle sprain because of some of the complications of Trent Williams' ankle history. John says it's clear the defense is thinking too much and not playing free. Slight changes to reads and keys are making the defense play hesitant. Yeah, I think that they're trying to absorb probably too much new information. I don't think that this is a theory too, but I think that Shanahan has hinted at that. I think some players have hinted at that. I think that the communication obviously hasn't been great. The alignments have not been on track. We've seen Fred Warner misalign so many times this year. And when that happens, the coverage and the rush aren't married together, and they have to be. Just look at the history of when this has worked for the 49ers. Rush and coverage have been cohesive when this has worked, and it's worked more often than not. I will say that in the large picture, previous defensive coordinators have struggled more at the start of their tenures than at the end of them. It's taken a while for them to pick up steam, but the results that the 49ers put on tape over the past 2 weeks have been unacceptable, even if there is an acclimatization period that needs to be expected from somebody like Steve Wilks. You can't give up 19 completions in a row. You can't give up 28 out of 32 to Burrow once you got in rhythm. You can't let Kirk Cousins throw for 378 yards against you. I mean, the one truly unacceptable play was the cover zero call against Minnesota. Would that have been different had Steve Wilks been down on the field? Would the chain of communication been different? I don't know. But the 49ers felt they had to shake something up, and this is what they have shaken up. You have the article in the description of this video, so please do check it out. 49ers defensive coordinator Steve Wilks to call plays from the sideline versus Jacksonville, why the change was made. Here's another good thought. 32 tackles in 3 games after the 49ers had missed, only 9 over the previous 3? And you ask, why did they miss all those tackles? Well, and there's always several answers to these issues. So it's not simple. I know everybody wants to blame one thing, but I think in this case, the tackling springs from a couple different reasons. One, there was a lot of fatigue against Cincinnati, but then you say, well, there wasn't as much fatigue the previous 2 weeks. So they were obviously that's not the whole story. That's true. So you could say it was both fatigue and also the missed alignments and the hesitation that's coming from some of the communication issues that the 49ers have seen with Wilks, and probably that's stemming from some of the schematic changes that we've seen, so increased man coverage. A lot of this adds up to players not being as sure of themselves, and then obviously missing tackles as a result. Players who are in good position, who are in confident good position, playing on their toes, moving downhill, they tend to miss fewer tackles. But then you say, okay, well, the 49ers played the first 5 weeks without missing many tackles. And that's true. I think, though, that the 49ers offense masked a lot of the defense's issues over the first 5 weeks. The one smoking gun behind this theory is the 49ers run defense has fallen off a cliff ever since the start of the season. We saw big cracks already in week 2 if we were looking closely enough. So when the offense was blowing everybody out, when everybody was healthy, Trent Williams, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, the defense might have still been structurally compromised, not fully adapted to be efficient under Steve Wilks. But with big leads, they could just afford to roll up their sleeves and play downhill with reckless abandon. They didn't care. And that ended up making them look good from the tackling perspective and from the efficiency perspective. But still, the poor run defense was there. The edges weren't being set. Some of the cushions might have been too big, right? Early in the season. And those issues reared their ugly heads, became very, very apparent when the 49ers started playing close games. And that started in Cleveland in week 6 because opponents were able to run more. So the volume of the runs increased, which meant the damage of those runs increased. An inefficient run defense became an exposed run defense. That's when the 49ers started talking about needing to show that they could win ugly. They haven't shown that they can win ugly yet. They have had a chance to lick their wounds over the bye week. And with that opportunity, we'll see what they look like against Jacksonville. Mike asks if the defense isn't improved, do the 49ers make a change at defensive coordinator on Monday? I wouldn't rule anything out. And, I think that the NFL is such a week-by-week league so much can change between now and Monday, but we don't know what those changes are going to be. There's a chance the 49ers go out and shut out the Jacksonville Jaguars. Totally. There is. I mean, this defense is good enough, talent-wise, to do something like that. There's also a chance, as we've seen over the past 2 games, they get lit up. And if they do, well, then alarm bells are going to be going off everywhere because they've had a whole bye week to lick their wounds, recover, audit the defense, do all that. So, yes, everything's on the table if they get lit up again. But my point is we don't know what's going to happen this weekend. So why don't we just wait and see and react to what actually does happen? Because right now, I guarantee you it's not smart for anybody in the 49ers building, especially the guy in charge of this, Kyle Shanahan, to think about what he's going to do if this happens on Monday. He needs to see what actually happens on Monday, what the details and the context behind it are, and then he needs to make a decision moving forward. So I just think it's too early to ask this question because the necessary parameters behind it haven't happened yet. What the 49ers have done is they've made a change with the defensive coordinator based on the results against Minnesota and Cincinnati, and that's moving Steve Wilks from the booth down on the field. That's why he's on the field now, yes. This guy says that Wilks has been the scapegoat. The team has issues across offense and defense. The team is ranked number 1 in offense, DVOA. I mean, every single team in a violent, chaotic sport like football, especially professional football, is going to have negative plays and struggles and giveaways and whatever. You have to look at this on the aggregate. And in the simplest terms, the 49ers defense is ranked number 1 DVOA, defense adjusted value over average. The 49ers offense is ranked number 1 defense adjusted value over average, and the defense is ranked number 15. If the defense is mediocre and the offense is literally at the top of the league, I think that you could figure out which way the blame should go, and that's the way that the 49ers are putting it. So I don't think Steve Wilks is a scapegoat. He inherited the number 1 defense, and it's now number 15. It's as simple as that. It's a performance business. We're talking extensively about what has caused this drop from number 1 to number 15 for the defense, but it has happened. Undeniably, they've been number 30 over the past 2 games. That is alarming. What's happening on the offensive side of the ball is not alarming. Sorry, they've been missing Trent Williams. We know he's a big part of this team. They've been missing Deebo Samuel. He's a big part of this team. Yet Brock Purdy's QBR has gone up over the past 3 weeks, or past 2. It went down against the Browns, but against Minnesota and Cincinnati, he was still delivering explosive plays. There are levels to blame, and the level of blame on the 49ers defense is a lot higher than it is on the 49ers offense. Mr. Reason says that Jimmy Ward is really missed. And yes, that's one of the main personnel fracture points. I talked about this a few minutes ago, is that nickelback position. He was really, really important to the 49ers. But it still should not be a reason for a drop from number 1 to number 15 defensively. Jimmy Ward shouldn't be the difference between the league's best defense and a mediocre defense. That's it. There's more to it than just Jimmy Ward. Mike puts it bluntly. Purdy is not a problem for the 49ers. He's not. Objectively, he is not a problem for the 49ers. A lot of people like to blame the quarterback because it makes them feel better. I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm here to give you the truth. And Purdy is not a problem for the 49ers. Yes, number 1 offense is not the problem. If we're doing an honest 49ers intel, we can look at the breakdown from that perspective. John says Chase Young being a top run defender is huge at this point of the season. Chase Young was a top run defender. We'll see if he could return to that. That's like the big question that I have. I mean, Chase was a top 5 graded run defender in 2020 and 2021 before the ACL tear. He's in the 20s this year for Washington. But there's nothing that's going to whip you into shape better than being under Chris Kasarik and with Nick Bosa on this 49ers defensive line. If you stand next to Chase Young at 6'5", 264, you're like, okay, this guy's got the physical capability of setting an edge. He's flashed off the tape already this season. The 49ers' edge opposite Bosa has been a problem. Again, the most jarring drop-off of this defense has been the run defense going from number 1/number 2, number 1 in 21, number 2 in 2022, to number 26 this year. That cannot be emphasized enough. I wrote about this from the very beginning of those cracks really showing. A lot of people said, oh, it's just a fluke. It's not just a fluke. Half of the season is almost gone, and they've dropped from number 2 to number 26 in run defense. That is a massive, massive drop-off that you can't just explain with, oh, Jimmy Ward is gone. Oh, Samson Ebukam is gone. If Jimmy Ward and Samson Ebukam were the difference between the number 2 and the number 26 run defense in the league, both of those guys would be making about $25 million per year. So they're not the difference here. They might be part of it. They're not the total difference, though. There's more to this, and I think a lot of it is the communication defensively, the rotations defensively, the mentality of the defense, which is related to a lot of the new information they're probably receiving. I think it's been a complicated issue, which is why people like Richard Sherman have emphasized simplification. Simplify the operation. Go back to what was working before, because you cannot have a defense that was number 1 in the NFL drop to number 15 with really good personnel, arguably better at some spots. You just can't have it. I mean, if you look at team tiers, it's the defense that's holding the 49ers back. Let's have a look at this right here. This is actually going to be I think, very illustrative graphic to show what the 49ers need on the big picture to reemerge as the undisputed top team in the NFL, because they're still really damn good. Let me get this up on the screen. We'll make this very large up on the screen for you so we can illustrate in no uncertain terms what's going on here. Okay, so offense, EPA per play is going to be plotted left and right axis. Defense EPA per play, vertical, up and down. So theoretically, you want to be way up here in this corner. In the past, the 49ers had been like up here to the left, but above the Ravens. They had an awesome defense at the height of the Browns, but the offense was just a little bit above average. It was solid, but it wasn't great. This year, the offense is indisputably great. It's over here with Buffalo and Miami for the 49ers, all the way to the right. But the defense has just been lowering all season. The defense is near average, and some measurements even have the defense as below average. So what's happened is the 49ers are grouped in the first tier, which is decided by the diagonal lines, with Baltimore, with Buffalo, and with Miami, with Dallas and Kansas City knocking on the door. Obviously, Philadelphia is a threat as well. These are your primary contenders. That's where the 49ers are. If the defense got just a little bit better, if the defense got up to Dallas's level, Kansas City's level, New Orleans level, Jacksonville's level, they're playing them, the Jets level, the 49ers would be in a tier of their own. They'd be up here. They don't need the defense to be way up here. If they're way up here, I mean, if they got the number 1 defense in the NFL, if they were like Cleveland, the 49ers would be one of the greatest teams of all time. We actually thought that was possible because we thought that the defense wouldn't regress the way that it has under Steve Wilks. But it has regressed. That's just the truth of the matter. Now the question is, can the 49ers pick themselves up out of the regression and get a little bit better, move up here? It's as simple as that. Chase Young being a tough run defender might help the 49ers do that. All right. Chuck, I think, summarizes everything here. If the defense was playing at number 1, the 49ers would be whooping some ass. Spoken like Chuck from the 559. Cheers to the 559 with my tea from Dolores Park Cafe. Warriors, Denver tonight. Who's excited for that? Should be good. All right, we're going to get to Trevor Lawrence, or actually, no, we're going to do Brock Purdy and the 49ers offense against this Jacksonville defense in just a bit. Thanks for your questions. Be sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, because before this Warriors game gets really good, we're going live one more time, and then we're going to have some fun watching The two previous NBA defending champions, the Warriors in Denver, playing tonight. Everybody, thanks for joining. Stay tuned for the next one coming very soon. Bye now.